Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Nina Rosner, and I'm here with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. Today, we're going to be digging into 3 ways a narcissist deflects. Now, if you Google this, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of things. We've lumped them into about 3 categories. We've come up with our own titles for some of this stuff. But the reason we're talking about it is because these things show up in your relationship. And we want to encourage you that A, it's normal, and B, there's maybe some things you can do. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I want to remind you right now of our website, greaterimpact.org, and you can take a marriage assessment, see how things are going over there. And maybe you should be mentoring with us if you're like knocking it out of the park, or perhaps we can help you improve your marriage and deepen your connection with God and yourself and your spouse. So anyway, so we're talking about this whole topic of deflection, Kyle. And I don't know about you, but I think I've been guilty of doing this. I was reading about it. I'm like, oh, I've done that. Oops. It's not a habit, but I think I've been defensive in my life and done it. So some of the things we talk about today are going to be things that like make people go, oh, but that doesn't mean that they're a narcissist, right?
Exactly. And thank you for starting with that,
Yeah.
because the last thing we want to do is to, cause people to feel like that they're suffering from something that they're not suffering from, or that they've been or that they're diagnosable. I remember in graduate school it was abnormal psychology. When we started the semester in the first class, the professor came to the podium. He stood there and he opened I think at the time it was the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, book number 3. And I think now they're on 7. I don't know. And he opened the book and he said, "In my hands, I hold the practitioner's Bible." He says, "This tells us the things that can be wrong, and this is the way that we diagnose our clients, and you need to have one, you need to study it, you need to know it, just like we do the Holy Bible."
Mm.
And he said, "But there's one thing you need to understand about it before I say another word." And he says, "You don't have all these disorders." He said, "You're going to think you do, because you're going to see characteristics of disorders that you see in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be collected with another bunch of characteristics in order for it to be an applicable diagnosis." He said, "So stop the self-diagnosing already." So this kind of reminds me of that, is that, we're talking about narcissism throughout the month of February. And as we do that, the the tendency is to listen to these things and say, "Well, I feel that way sometimes, and
Mm-hmm.
I've thought that before, and maybe even I've done that before."
Mm-hmm.
You know, "Oh no, I'm a narcissist." Well, just because you're listening to this and you have a characteristic or two doesn't make you a narcissist, as we say in Texas. And just because you're born in the kitchen doesn't make you a biscuit.
My word, that sounds like a Texas thing
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
So anyhow, that's a great way to start, to say, lighten up, settle down, get a drink of water, sit down, and come along with us on this short but I think interesting journey today, on looking at how not just narcissists, but all of us on occasion
Sure.
deflect
Mm-hmm.
information, issues, situations that we find ourselves in with really anybody in any relationship, but we're talking most specifically with our spouses and partners.
Yeah. Yeah. This is such an important topic because deflection is a lack of taking ownership and having agency over the impact that you have on other people in your life. And so if you're going to be good at relationships, we have to have an awareness that when we deflect, it's a, and there's probably reasons why we do it, but it's not an agency moment. It's not a space where we're acting like mature people. It's a space of immaturity that's not awesome for the relationship. And yeah, maybe your spouse is wrong, or maybe you're wrong, right, about the thing that you think your partner did. And that's certainly a different topic. But when you've got these patterns of lack of ownership and lack of agency, there's some things in there that we need to take a look at, because they do have a lasting impact on the relationship.
You're right, and I think that there are a lot of ways to look at deflection. You just mentioned immaturity. We'll also add in their cowardice. We'll add in their dismissiveness, disrespectfulness. There are a lot of things. It seems like those all start with a D, except cowardice, I suppose. But anyway, that's a sermon for another day.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
3 points in a poem, and it's best if there is alliteration involved.
There you go.
So that's a sermon, right? But just to say all of the negativity and the negative reasons that an individual would deflect. And there are a few situations where there are and let me backtrack and say those are excuses on why someone will deflect. There are reasons as well, and they're legitimate reasons, but the ability and the necessity to communicate that is critical here, because we do give room to defer a conversation so that someone can think through what they want to say. And that's not really deflection. Yeah. It's just a matter of saying, I'd like to prepare myself to speak on this before I do. So deflection is either a very direct, or sometimes an indirect means of saying, A, I'm not going to have this conversation, not the way you see it going. B, this conversation is going to take a turn, and you're not going to like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we go from trying to solve a problem to being assaulted potentially, or abandoned in the situation. One of the things that Gottman's people talk about so much is the power of repair. Yes. Healthy couples repair, because injuries occur in relationships. Like, we're all imperfect people. I'm going to do something that upsets somebody sometime, right? So are they. And so we have to have a mechanism for repairing the damage. And this deflection thing gets in the way of that, because when people don't take ownership, then there's like less connection in the relationship as a result of that. Or you could make it better, right? So as we're navigating this today, we've kind of chunked them into three big categories. We're going to talk about some of the behaviors in those three categories, because the lists of 9 and 11, it's like, okay, why memorize all of that? Let's just make it simple, keep it simple, and dig into what those things look like. And the first one is what we call the flash bang. And I'm going to give this, attribute this title to Kyle, because it's really cool. Just the whole physical, it's just what you can imagine of what the flashbang would look like. And I want you to describe it, because you did it so perfectly earlier.
Well, I remember a Sunday school class, and I don't remember the topic, but I remember the question that the teacher asked us. I guess maybe I was in junior high. I must have been high school, because he was referring to driving. And he said, "What? You're driving down the street, and suddenly in front of you, you see that there's a car that has stopped faster than you expected them to, or without you expecting them to. And you realize it's going to be really close as to whether you can stop or not. There's a car to your right. There's traffic coming to your left. What do you do?" And so, man, we're getting real creative with our answers, and this and that. And I'd jump out, and I would turn and do donut, and and I could tell that the teacher was getting frustrated as we were going through this. And so finally he said, okay, this obviously was not a good choice. He said, I was kind of hoping that you would, say something about reaching for the emergency brake, but nobody was going there. So let's take this from the standpoint of situations we've all seen in the movies or on television. And that is that there's good guys and bad guys, and they're in a standoff. And let's say, regardless of whether you're the good guy or the bad guy, somebody throws a flashbang grenade and you're the one they're throwing it at. And it rolls up to your feet. Now, this may be happening in our minds in slow motion, but actually we have to act pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do? This thing is about to explode. It won't kill you, but it's going to incapacitate you. It's going to blind you and make you unable to hear, knock you down, and disorient you. Okay. Is that what you want? No, of course not. But you've got to do something or that's going to happen. So what are you going to do if that grenade rolls up to your feet?
Oh, I'm going to yeet that thing right back at the dude that threw it at me in the first place.
Yeet it. Yeet it. That's right.
Yeah.
Gonna yeet that thing right out of there. That's a 21st century word for sure. And I've been introduced to it by my own kids. But yeah, you're gonna chuck it back. And that is a form of deflection. We call it flashbang deflection. You're going to bring something to me, you're going to lay it at my feet. And for whatever the reason, I'm saying, don't bring that in here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to throw it right back at you and say, don't throw your trash in my backyard.
Yeah.
Because your backyard's full of trash too.
Yeah. So that right there, the
I remember
accusation.
a very specific application of this, and I'm trying to Gene Edwards is the author of the book. The book is called A Tale of Two Kings. And in this scenario, he's written about King Saul throwing a spear at David. And he says, what does the teenage David do? Well, of course, when someone throws a spear at you and it sticks in the wall, you rip it out of the wall and you throw it right back. That's deflection.
Mm-hmm.
David chose not to.
Mm-hmm.
As a teenager, as a kid, he made the difficult choice to not deflect and engage himself in an unending back and forth with King Saul.
Yeah. Yeah.
He chose to leave the spear in the wall and to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
That's a difficult choice to make. Because most of us would indeed pick up the flashbang grenade and throw it right back to the person that threw it to us, even knowing it's going to damage them. We do it. Why can't we? Well, in this situation, we don't have time to walk away. Why don't we throw it out a window, into another room, under a bed? We never even think about that. The only choice we think about is throwing it back at the person who threw it at us. So there are a lot of dynamics that go along with this kind of deflection that we could beat to death for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line of it is that, no, I'm not going to take accountability, and maybe justifiably so, maybe not, who knows. I'm not taking accountability for this because you do the same thing here.
Yep. Well, and to your point, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I should be proud about this, but I had a moment where I was like, well, I don't have to yeet it back at them, but if I don't, then he doesn't have a way to explain this. So, so I like chose to, because you've got the Dale Carnegie principle, avoid the argument. Yeah, and the harsh words stir up anger. So you get zero traction from behaving the way that you don't return evil for evil. Like and I don't really think it's my nature most of the time, at least externally. It used to be like I used to return evil for evil, just being honest. But I don't do that anymore. But I think it's a natural temptation for most people to do that some of the time.
Hmm.
And I think that's what most people do. And it has a lot of faces. Like you can retort right back and turn it on its head with the thing that person just said. Hey, I want to talk to you about how, like they might not even be throwing a grenade, but you perceive it as a grenade. You're
Yes.
so
Great point.
defensive. Yeah. And so just a simple, hey, can we talk about this thing, could launch justification or more accusation, just leveling the other person, just like they think they just were because somebody has a problem with them. Ah,
Yeah.
flashbang.
And this never ends well unless we choose to say, okay, this attempt or whatever it is about didn't work. I've got to dispose of this thing. Can I do it inflicting the minimum amount of damage possible? It's going to go off. The pin's already been pulled.
Yeah.
How do I dispose of this without inflicting the damage to the other person that they intended to inflict to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because now we got multiple issues now. Maybe we just had one. Now we have exponential number. Who knows?
Right. So let's say we're talking about, we'll make a simple example. You brought my car home without gas in it last night, and I was late for work this morning because I'm just making this up, but because of that. And this has happened before, and I want to talk to you about it. And then you're deflecting all of the things, and whatever way you want to do that, lots of it. One of the ways of handling that is, you know what, I can see it's not a good time for the conversation. We can talk about this later. And then you bring it up later, hoping you're going to get a better version of your spouse or
Yeah.
your teenager or whoever you're talking to. But like saying, like, you have to stop that in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you get sucked into it. And that's the thing you want to avoid, I think.
Hmm. Absolutely. Because any participation beyond the chunking of the grenade, any participation at that level for that reason is not going to lead to anything positive.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to require two people that have a bit of maturity about them and that are going to be able to say, okay, we have an issue on the table. And regardless of whether one of us is accurate about our perception of the issue or not, it needs to be discussed so that clarity and truth will be known to everybody. And we can decide how to handle the feelings at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because it's
that's
a whole
true.
lot easier to deal with if we know the truth than it is to know when we are, screaming memes, very upset, emotionally driven, because we're basing our truth on our perceptions, whether we know whether it's true or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so are they. And so then you have both of that. And then, so, who knows what's actually going on, but God.
Right.
Yeah. So that's fair. So let's move into the second category, which is brick wall. You mentioned that is a big
I
area.
did. I
Yeah.
did. And I actually have, I think, a great scenario here of early in a marriage. And I'm not saying this was me and my wife. I'm just saying it could be any husband or any early in a marriage, and a conflict comes along. There haven't been many, but the conflict comes along, and one person decides to flee the scene of the crime. Um, and the husband in this situation follows the wife in the situation out the front door and says, "Hey, we were having a conversation."
Mhm.
And the wife says, "No, you were having a conversation. We were not having a conversation. Not only that, we're not going to have this conversation." And off she goes.
Yeah.
It could easily be one gender or the other.
Yeah.
And again, I'm neither confirming or denying that that is a personal experience. However, that's what we call the brick wall. In the brick wall deflection, there is no point in discussing it further. This conversation, however long it has lasted, is over.
Hmm. Forever.
Perhaps. In one person's mind, yes. In the other
Yeah.
person's mind, this means I'm going back to the drawing board. This didn't work. I'm going to have to come at it at a different angle.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So nothing is resolved with the brick wall deflection ever,
Mhm.
because it's basically like, okay, this chapter is closed. If this is going to be a scenario, a dynamic, an issue, whatever this situation calls for, that is going to be discussed between two people, then it's going to happen in a different way.
Yeah. And some of the comments that get made around that are, you always make such a big deal out of everything.
Mm-hmm.
We're we're not talking about this.
Yeah.
It's dismissive, like this isn't important. Don't I'm not giving my time to this.
Yeah.
You, the
Number two issue, number 10 response.
Yep.
Our
Yep.
reaction. That's a reaction. That's not a response. Yeah.
Fair. Yeah. Yeah. So those kinds of things where you get just no resolution whatsoever. It's worse, I think, than the first thing, the
Mm-hmm.
flashbang, because at least with that, you like it's almost like a chess game. You can try to figure something out, maybe, right? And sometimes validation works in there, and sometimes just deferring the conversation. But with this, it's like somebody saying, yeah, no, sorry, not in the landscape, not in the future. We're just done here.
Yeah.
Topic on the list of things we never talk about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is typically, we can call it a lot of things and use a lot of different terms. It's the inability or the unwillingness to accept accountability.
Mm-hmm.
It's immaturity. It can be considered or characterized, as a lot of different things. But when all is said and done, nothing got done.
Mm-hmm.
Some things got said.
Yeah.
And usually the climate or the landscape is going to be a bit more jumbled or chaotic than it was when one person came to try. And you know what? Sometimes the approach is the problem.
Hello. Yes.
Okay. The
Yeah.
approach is the problem. So we can't always say the brick wall person, I mean, it still may not be the best way to respond, but we can't always say they're wrong about the problem. They're wrong about perhaps how they go about handling that situation.
Yeah. Because, you have a harsh startup 87% of the time. That's how that conversation's going.
Yeah.
It's going to be harsh on both ends. So we want to avoid that and approach people in kindness, gentleness, and self-control. Hello,
Mhm.
love, that thing. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to note about this is that when we're dealing with this, even if we're approaching properly and we get this as the blowback, we can always pray for our spouse that they would be open to the Lord, because they're not open to Him. That's why they're not open to us.
Yep. Let me give a practical example,
Yeah.
if it's okay. In the brick wall scenario, one of the most common places we see this play out is in one of the most difficult discussions that married couples have, and that's in the area of money and finance. And so one of the ways we go about handling this in therapy, I got dogs going nuts. I'm sure you can hear them.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Let me just try to think through it.
Yeah. So Jazz will fix this piece too.
Yeah. Thanks, Jess.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
One of the ways that we handle this in therapy is what was
You're talking about money.
money. One of the ways that we handle this in therapy is that we talk with whoever is feeling the need to bring this to the table about how the approach needs to look. So rather than an approach coming through that now my phone is ringing in my ears, in my hearing aids.
Oh. Oh,
Beauty.
it's all right. Things happen. That's
Okay.
why we have a
One
rocket.
of the way we handle this in therapy is that speaking to the person that wants to bring the issue to the table, we talk about their approach, often because of the amount of emotion involved in monetary and financial discussions, that where we know there's disagreement, or we know where there has been behaviors that we don't agree with or haven't agreed upon, is just to come forward and say, why did this happen? Or here I have, and throw down the evidence, of the invoices or the receipts or whatever, and say, in an angry way, because this is an emotional situation, I don't like this. This is not what we agreed upon. I'm upset. I'm angry. And that is going to make it difficult for this to be a productive conversation. If you involve the same people in the same situation, but you change the approach to something along the lines of, here is something I'd like to accomplish in the next 6 months or year financially, maybe a vacation. I know we've talked about that, and we've talked about it would be nice to do this, but we never seem to have the funds. Let's see what we can do to work together to make sure that we get to do this fun thing. And then you begin having a conversation about finance. And it's still not always easy, but the approach is critical, especially if most financial discussions tend to go the same direction each time.
Mm-hmm.
If one person is a spender and one person is a saver, and we're not meeting our financial plans and expectations, then you know the way that's going.
Yeah.
So there is definitely value in the how, sometimes more so than in the what,
Yeah, I agree.
in terms of getting things done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. That's so good, to remind people of that, because the way we approach a conversation increases the likelihood of it going well if we do that well. So,
Yes.
yeah, good thing to point out for sure. So, the last one is like, I can't say it. So I'm gonna let you
Can't
say
say it because somebody's going to say, oh my gosh, everybody's saying that about everything.
it.
You're not going to say it.
No, I'm not going to say it. Like, I don't
Oh,
remember what it is. I wrote down gaslighting, but it's more than that. And you wrote it. You had something about.
oh
I
yes, the illumination of fuel. Yes, we
Yeah.
call it that, just so that
Thank
we're not
you.
accused of using pop culture. So,
Yeah. There you go. Thank you. Yeah. So what does that actually mean?
well, dozens of ways we see it played out, many ideas about what gaslighting really is. But I think something that you and I've discussed before, that, we kind of come down to a central truth about what it is, and that it is denying someone else's truth.
Mhm.
Why? A million different reasons. What we want them to actually see and think, and how we want this to end up, 1,000 different ways. But the central part that seems to be true every time is that one of us is going to share with the other our truth, and we're going to go about that conversation as if, have you lost your ever loving mind?
Yeah.
How did you come up with that
Mhm.
conclusion? Because here's the truth about it, and
Mhm.
it's not what you just said.
Mhm. You're not remembering that quite right. That's not what
Mm-hmm.
happened.
You
Yeah.
must have misheard me.
Yeah. I didn't say
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Okay. Sure. Yeah, it's
That's
really
not how
bad.
I'm remembering that conversation. I could bring others in to say the same thing if you'd like.
Oh, that right there. That's a level up, right? When
I,
you offer to bring in witnesses.
I've heard of people doing that. Yes.
It's a thing. Yeah. Jeez. Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole,
So this is just an attempt to cause someone else to doubt themselves,
mhm,
and whether it's to doubt their clarity, to doubt their um, ability to report the news, or whether it's for them to doubt their sanity, literally.
yeah.
It can actually go that far,
Mhm,
to someone actually having this happen enough times to say, is something wrong with me? Am I crazy?
yeah.
And then start asking friends and people, is it me? Because I felt like I was doing the respectful, responsible, accountable thing by taking an issue to my spouse. And the next thing I know, I'm being told, that I'm nuts.
Mhm,
Where did I get that?
mhm.
How in the world could I come to that conclusion out of what happened here?
I've seen a few people use this as a strategy around affairs, where the wife will find something in the phone, which, by the way, she shouldn't be looking at anyway, but she does. And she brings it to her husband's attention, and he has innumerable ways of not discussing it. Then he deletes it and is ready for the conversation, and it's not there anymore.
Hmm. Don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. So
Yeah.
reality, and then you do enough of that, you start to doubt what's real.
Yeah. So whether it starts that way or not, whether you're just trying to avoid and deflect for the moment, sooner or later you got to keep up your game.
It becomes
And
cumbersome,
and
I'm
then you
sure.
have to get devious. And that's when things get really sideways,
Mm,
is, when we start getting devious, and and then the lack of truth becomes a real significant factor in whatever it was that one person wanted to bring to the other.
mhm.
So um, that's a bad one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, unless the illumination of gas is controlled, it always ends up in some type of an explosion. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what's happening here.
Mhm.
And it, again, it brings out the worst in human nature, I think, because I have put something in motion hoping against hope that it just dies there,
Mhm.
but then it doesn't. Well, then I've got to go a level deeper into my deviousness and either create another lie, or double down on the craziness that ever brought this to the plate to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to normalize the experience of two people having two completely different perceptions in a conflict. That is actually kind of normal and okay,
Mm-hmm.
because we have our own internal world and our own identity, and so we're going to perceive things differently. We're talking about some malicious intent where we actually kind of know what's happened and we're lying about it basically on purpose to create an awareness that you're crazy. We're intentionally steering an untruth.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than, well, this is what I know happened. And our partner may not be gaslighting if they're like, well, no, that's not what happened. So I don't want to, muddy the waters with your partner's a gaslighter if they disagree with you and your reality. No, they might
Yeah.
just be defensive. So you've got to have a bunch of these behaviors. Matter of fact, you got to have, if you listen to the other podcasts we've done on this, so you got to have a bunch of these behaviors, checking all the boxes for this to be a real thing in your life. And it's got to be consistent, and there's got to be malintent. And it's really, I think, pretty uncommon in people that are actually Christians and love the Lord and want to follow him, because the Holy Spirit's going to whack you upside the head if you're not nasty. That's been my experience. Like, he's got a short tolerance for that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and remember the commonality for narcissism that I think we've identified in back a podcast or two ago, is that one of the characteristics of that is that the narcissist has no regard for the chaos or for the difficulty that their behavior causes others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is one where when you got that nastiness in there, the narcissist knows. They expect. Matter of fact, they even hope that this causes chaos because it'll take the attention off,
Mm-hmm.
and allow them to go on about their narcissistic ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we should point out too that if we have some awareness that sometimes we behave like this, we're probably not narcissists.
Hmm.
It's like, but get in line with the Holy Spirit in that space. And a gentle answer turns away wrath. Think about how you want to approach your communication. Do some things that are useful in that space instead of what you're doing now. And if you do that, then you're going to have better outcomes in your communication. So
Outstanding.
yeah, want to make sure that we land the plane with that awareness. So regardless of whether you're dealing with narcissism or anything else, if you want to live in Texas and you want to reach out to Kyle for some therapy, you can find him at Kyle with a K, Kyle Hargrove, Hargrove, LPC at gmail.com. And he'll be sure to connect with you and you guys can set up some time. In the meantime, grab the subscribe button and push it, and then listen to the next episode because you'll learn some other ways of connecting with your spouse and dealing with difficulties in relationships. Thanks so much for being here.